Barefoot she stepped into the light, the dust of endless toils caking her ankles in a gritty embrace. Her dress, once vibrant, now faded and shapeless, clung to her like a tattered flag of surrender. There was no bonnet to shield her from prying eyes, no shawl to wrap around her soul, just a silence so profound that even the rowdiest of men hushed their jeers. They bound her to the post with a rope frayed from the countless others it had tethered, treating her no differently than they would a horse. She stood unyielding, her back straight, her chin dipped in a quiet defiance as the town square buzzed with a mix of curiosity and cold-heartedness. The auctioneer, his voice rising above the stifling afternoon heat, began his spiel, shuffling papers that served more as props than purpose. 19 years old, strong, no known ailments, capable of long hours in the field or house obedient. A laugh broke the tension, a sharp comment from a woman in a plum skirt sliced through the air, and another lady fanned herself in the absence of any real breeze. The girl, however, remained silent, her gaze fixed somewhere beyond the crowd. To the side, her mother leaned against the saloon's railing, her arms crossed, her expression twisted with the bitterness of too much drink and too many disappointments. Her stare at her daughter was not of love or concern, but of cold detachment, as if the girl were nothing more than a discarded tool. "She ain't worth much," she slurred, her voice heavy with liquor. "But I'm tired of feeding her. She's yours if you take her today." Whispers slithered through the crowd like snakes' tails of the girl from beyond Dry Creek, rumored to have once run off with a trader, now abandoned by all but this woman who bartered her away like cattle. The auctioneer, unfazed, continued, "Who will take the girl? She works quietly, asks for little." At first, no one responded to the auctioneer's call for more bids. The silence was thick, palpable. A few men glanced over their eyes, quickly darting away as if the sight was too much for them. A shopkeeper let out a chuckle, shaking his head in disbelief, while a young boy, barely more than a whisper, muttered something about second-hand wares only to receive a sharp elbow from his mother. The girl, she stood there, her gaze fixed on the ground, resigned to the silence, her heart heavy with the weight of indifference. Then a shadow shifted at the edge of the crowd. A tall figure clad in a worn brown duster emerged. His presence was as sudden as it was silent. No one could recall seeing him arrive. Leaning against the blacksmith's post, his hat pulled low, his hands steady on the railing, he seemed to carry the dust of journeys past. A whisper floated through the crowd. "Isn't that the widower from South Ridge? I heard he sold his cattle. No help left. Perhaps he's here just to watch." But he wasn't there just to watch. With a step forward, his hand raised in a subtle gesture, the quiet shattered like glass under a hammer. "I'll take her," he declared, his voice neither loud nor soft, just resolute. The auctioneer, taken aback, blinked in confusion. "You'll take," a single nod was his response. The girl's mother, with a snort of derision, confirmed, "She's mine to be rid of." He moved closer. The coins exchanged were neither a fortune nor a pittance, but just enough. Yet he didn't immediately free her. Instead, he studied her, his gaze not meeting hers, but settling on the rope, the raw skin of her wrists, the dirt beneath her feet. With a careful motion, he produced a pocket knife, slicing through the bindings. She didn't flinch, and he didn't touch her. "Are you hurt?" he asked, his voice gentle. She shook her head. "Do you have a name?" Silence was her answer. "Doesn't matter," he said, stepping back. "There's a wagon waiting. You come or stay. Your choice was." For a moment, the world seemed to hold its breath. Then, with a hesitant step, she moved off the crate, her knees buckling slightly before she caught herself stepping into a new uncertain freedom. His arm remained unoffered, yet he matched his stride to the weary pace of her faltering legs, and side by side they departed from the square that bearing the scrutiny of countless eyes. No one dared to intervene. They reached a wagon, humble and unadorned, with a restless mule tethered to it. Gently he assisted her into the back, handed her a canteen, and uttered not another word. Behind them, the town dissolved into a haze of dust, heat, and silent judgment. She did not inquire about their destination. She spoke not at all, but drank the water as if it were a sacred elixir. For the first time in what felt like an eternity, she allowed herself the luxury of a deep breath. The trail unfurled before them, like a silent ribbon weaving through the afternoon that blushed from amber to gold and then into dusk. Shadows like specters rose from the grass and entwined themselves around the wagon's wheels. He drove at a leisurely pace, unhurried as if time itself were a companion on this journey. She sat legs crossed, observing the road that seemed to disappear into a past she was leaving behind. There were no tears, no terror, only a silence too profound for one so young. As the mule's pace slackened, the sky had already turned to a gentle lavender. In the distance, a house weary from the years leaned slightly, accompanied by an oak in its twilight and a barn that appeared ancient. "This is it," he announced. She remained silent. A lit lantern guided her descent. "Kitchen's through there. Your room's upstairs. Are you hungry?" She shook her head. "Are you clean?" Another nod. He opened the door, holding it for her. The interior exhaled scents of cedar and ash, devoid of frills, just wooden floors and furniture worn smooth by time, a single faded picture above the hearth, its image lost to memory. "You don't know me," he said. "I know," she replied, her voice as thin as the air. He gestured towards a staircase, indicating the room at the top to the left. She ascended, leaving the door ajar, a silent invitation or perhaps a cautious farewell. He did not follow. As dawn broke, he found her at the sink, her hands gently cradling the mugs as she washed them. "You don't have to do that," he murmured, his voice tinged with concern. She continued, her back to him. Her response soft. "I don't mind." Breakfast was a silent affair, no probing questions, no idle chit-chat, just the quiet clink of cutlery against plates. She noticed the slight limp in his step, while he observed her subtle flinch when the wind violently shut the door. Later, she endeavored to sweep the porch, only for the broom handle to snap under her touch. He repaired it silently, his hands deftly working the wood. She folded the towels into precise squares, her voice a mere whisper in her throat. As the night grew chill, he brought her a shawl, draping it over the banister, without a word, never insisting she wear it. And so their days unfolded, not with the clamor of drama, but with a profound silence rich with unspoken understanding. She watched him feed the mule first, each morning his touch on the fence post, as if greeting an old friend. Every night he uttered a simple good night, at the same time, even though she never echoed his words. He noticed her grimace at the rumble of thunder, her habit of peeling the crust off her bread before eating, and how she lingered outside long after the sun had set, her eyes fixed on the horizon as if seeking something elusive. One evening, her voice broke the stillness. "Why did you take me?" He paused, then poured coffee into 2 mugs, handing one to her. When he finally spoke, his voice was a low murmur. "Because no one else did." Her gaze fell to the mug, watching the steam dance between her fingers. "You could have chosen someone prettier," she whispered, her voice barely audible. He didn't even blink. "I didn't need pretty. What did you need?" His eyes drifted toward the barn. "Someone who wouldn't leave." She said nothing more that night, but the next morning she didn't sit as far from him. The distance between them subtly lessened. Here in this house that posed no questions, the girl with dust on her ankles had found a sanctuary, and the man with little to offer had given her a reason to stay. The heart once so guarded now unexpectedly made space for something unforeseen. Neither had ever clung to the gossamer threads of hope. Yet beneath the sky, bruised with shades of purple, that weathered porch held 2 chairs, and for the first time both were occupied. The girl awoke to a light that was gentle and unexpected. It seeped through muslin curtains as if whispering, "Don't be startled." As she sat up, the bed groaned under her slight weight, a sound she half expected to be followed by a harsh knock or a demanding shout. But none came. Downstairs, the house stirred with the lethargy of old age. Floorboards sang their ancient songs, while somewhere a kettle murmured its readiness. The rancher, always the early riser, was already out in the dawn's embrace. She folded the quilt with the precision of a soldier corners, sharp edges taut, a ritual from a life where order was a shield against chaos. The kitchen still bore the comforting scent of last night's bread, a silent testament to the day's continuity. A note awaited her on the table, penned in a rugged script. Coffee's on, I'm in the barn, feeds in the trough if you're up for it. No signature, no superfluous words, just the essentials. She read it twice, the simplicity of it touching something deep within. She tucked the note into her apron pocket, and an extraordinary thing occurred. Her shoulders, perpetually braced against life's onslaught, eased ever so slightly, as if an unseen hand had relaxed the tension within her. The morning outside was not the oppressive silence she was accustomed to, but a welcoming hush. She followed the deep, thoughtful footprints toward the barn, each step a silent story of burdens carried in silence. He didn't glance up as she entered, his focus on mending a bent hinge. The sunlight slipping through the barn slats painted golden stripes across the floor, with the dust dancing like forgotten spirits. I can help, she offered, her voice steady despite the tremor in her heart. You sure? His question, simple yet loaded with meaning. She nodded, her resolve firm. I'm used to work. With a gesture toward the hay, he invited her into his world. Could this be the beginning of something new, where the weight of the past is shared and the future holds more than just survival? Imagine the scene, fresh bedding piled high against the wall, untouched by questions or comments on how she had slept. No probing into her past, just the gift of space. That was his unspoken promise. Together they toiled for hours, he mending a splintered stall door, with a steady hand she clearing the space with shovel and broom, the air between them filled with a gentle, wordless understanding. A rhythm began to emerge, not exactly a melody, but certainly not a discord, either, just two souls engaged in the tasks they knew best. By midday, the sun had coaxed curls of her hair to cling to the damp skin of her neck. She didn't ask for water yet, he offered a tin cup silently. She drank deeply, returned it, their fingers touching briefly. It was a moment that was both nothing and everything. As the afternoon waned, she stood at the fence, her arms resting on the top rail, watching the wind caress the grass with the tenderness of a mother soothing her child. He joined her silent. Did you build all this? She inquired, her voice soft. He gave a single nod. Most of it, he replied, his gaze fixed on the horizon. Why? She pressed. He answered, because someone had to, and I was still here. She understood even without further explanation. That evening, as she diced carrots and he carried in firewood, the kitchen filled with the comforting aroma of stew and the gentle crackle of burning logs. The house no longer felt empty, but rather like a song paused, waiting for its next note. She observed him, the careful placement of his boots by the door, his gentle closing of cupboards, the delicate movements of his weathered hands. He in turn noticed her, how she turned her face to the warmth, as if thawing from a long winter, her choice of the cracked plate and smaller portions, her preference for listening over speaking, as if words had once betrayed her. The next morning she discovered, in the quaint quietude of the kitchen, there lay a humble cloth folded and abandoned upon the table, a simple apron, hand-stitched with care, not ornate yet rich in sentiment. She caressed the hem as if it were spun from the finest gold, her fingers tracing the threads that spoke of dedication and love. By the third day she had memorized the cadence of his footsteps on the porch, and he, the gentle hum that escaped her lips as she peeled apples. Their words were few yet, the silence between them was no longer barren. It brimmed with unspoken understanding, though shadows of the past still whispered in the corners of their shared space. Each night he would pass by a narrow door at the hallway's end, never daring to touch it. She observed how his gaze would darken at its sight, how his jaw would clench for a fleeting moment. Curiosity once led her hand to the doorknob, but it refused to turn. It was locked. Later she inquired about it. Used to be her room, he murmured, offering no name, no further explanation. She did not probe, respecting the silence he cloaked around that memory. That evening, as she lay in the quiet of her bed, her mind wandered to all the rooms she had known, those with boards nailed across windows where words like property and payment hung heavy in the air, thick as smoke. Now, though free to leave, she remained bound by a hesitancy that was both comforting and confounding. Midweek, the heavens unleashed a torrent, as if the sky could no longer contain its tears. She stepped outside, lifting her face to the deluge, letting the rain cleanse her, baptize her soul, washing away the doubts that lingered. He watched from the porch, dry and still, until he could no longer resist. Removing his coat, he approached, draping it over her shoulders in a silent embrace. No words were needed. His actions spoke volumes, and she didn't thank him. She didn't need to. He stayed close, not pulling away. That night, their dinner was different. The silence was broken. She shared tales of the first field she had toiled in, of how her hands bled from the labor, her voice a soft melody against the backdrop of their newfound companionship. The rancher shared a tale of sorrow of a calf born too soon, its life flickering out despite his vigilant care. They didn't shed tears, but a silent understanding thawed the frost between them, as if spring had begun to nudge at the edges of their winter. Yet they remained at a distance, each sensing the budding connection, but too cautious to name it. The following day, whispers reached them from the town. A neighbor had spotted her, branding her with the name, the Auction Girl. A man, assuming she was merely a temporary fixture, approached the rancher with an offer of coin to relieve him of her presence. But the rancher, with a voice of quiet defiance, responded, "She's under my roof. You'll leave now." That night, her question echoed in the quiet, "Why do they hate me?" He paused, then spoke with a heavy heart. "Because you remind them of a truth they dare not face, one where they'd barter away their daughters for mere coins and laugh at the trade." She met his gaze, finding in his eyes a reflection of her own solitude, now less stark. "I'm not broken," she whispered, her voice a thread of steel. "I know, I'm just tired," he replied, his words a soft echo of her own. They returned to the porch, not touching, yet not truly apart, and the old house seemed to sigh, exhaling a long, patient breath. That night she left her door ajar, not as an invitation, but as a testament to trust. He noticed but held back, not crossing the threshold, not yet. The space between them had lost its vastness now, just a floor, not an ocean, and that was enough for now. As they prepared the wagon under a sky heavy with clouds, dark and swollen, looming over the ridge like a harbinger of change, she stood at the porch rail, her fingers nervously clutching the shawl he had left behind. Just days ago, she stood gazing at the distant town as if it might vanish if she blinked. He stepped beside her, pulling on his coat. "You still want to go?" She nodded. "We need flour salt. Maybe some thread." He nodded back. No lecture, no worry, just quiet agreement. They rode in silence, the road now a familiar friend, every jolt in the trail absorbed into their very bones. She sat straighter than she used to. He noticed that, and she noticed he checked her hands when he passed her the reins, as if he wanted to be sure the calluses were healing. When they reached town, the wind had shifted. People noticed them this time, not just fleeting glances, but stares that lingered longer than decency should allow. "She's the one," someone whispered, "that auction girl." They walked side by side into the general store, the bell over the door ringing once, then echoing too long. The shopkeeper looked up and offered a thin smile. "You back for seed, mister?" "No," the rancher said, "just supplies." The girl moved quietly through the aisles, picking up what they needed, measuring the sugar with careful fingers. But when she reached for the sewing thread, another hand shot out and slapped hers away. "You don't touch nothing delicate," sneered the woman behind the counter. She was younger than the girl's mother, yet her cruelty seemed to age her beyond her years. "This ain't a brothel's pantry." The girl froze, her breath caught halfway to her lungs. The shopkeeper didn't interfere. The rancher stepped forward, slow and steady. "That's enough," he said, his voice low but firm. The woman huffed. "You're the one who bought her. What's it matter what she touches?" He said nothing at first, just looked at the girl's hand, the redness blooming across the knuckles. Then turning to the woman, his gaze hardened. "You speak to her again, you'll wish I'd raised my voice." The journey back was draped in a heavy silence, the wagon creaking under the weight of unspoken words. Her gaze remained fixed on the distant horizon, hands folded quietly in her lap. "I'm sorry," he murmured after a long pause. She shook her head, her voice barely a whisper. You didn't do it, but you didn't stop it either. Her eyes burned with unshed tears, a testament to her resilience against the world's harsh judgments. I'm tired of feeling like a stain to be wiped away. You're not, he countered, his voice firm. She turned to him, her eyes searching. Then what am I to you? She demanded, her voice laced with a mixture of defiance and vulnerability. He paused, his gaze thoughtful. You're what they're too scared to acknowledge. They've discarded, he replied, his words heavy with meaning. As they neared the ranch, the rain began to fall, first softly like a gentle breath, then escalating into a relentless downpour, pounding the canvas cover like angry fists. Thunder roared across the plains, and the mule, startled, caused the wheels to skid in the slippery mud. He yanked the reins with urgency. We'll have to take shelter in the barn. They scrambled to unhitch the wagon, the rain drenching them to the bone. She sprinted ahead, throwing open the barn doors with a desperate heave. He followed, stumbling, slightly catching himself against the doorframe with a grunt. Inside, the storm's fury continued unabated, the wind howling through the rafters, the mule braying in distress. Water leaked through the old roof, a familiar sound in this ancient sanctuary. They stood soaked to the skin, breathing heavily. Her hair clung to her neck. His shirt outlined every scar on his body. Why say such things to me? She challenged, her voice echoing in the cavernous space. Because it's the truth, he answered simply. But you don't know me, she protested, her voice a mix of frustration and longing. I know enough, he insisted. No, you don't, she snapped, her words sharp. You don't know what I've done, what I've let happen. I don't need to, he said softly. But I need you to, she whispered, her voice breaking. The silence that followed was as thick as the rain outside. Then tell me, he urged, his voice gentle yet insistent. She looked away, gathering her strength with each breath. I was 15 the first time he offered me to another man. She took the coin, her voice shaking with the weight of her story. They said I was old enough, she began, her words laced with a bitter resolve. This world doesn't coddle girls who remain gentle. She added, her eyes searching his face for any sign of discomfort. He didn't flinch. He didn't turn away. She continued, her voice growing stronger with each word. I tried to escape. They caught me, locked me in a shed for 3 days. No water. When they finally let me out, I didn't fight anymore. Her voice cracked, a fissure in the facade she had built. I stopped counting the men after the 6th, she whispered, stepping closer to him, her hands trembling. You bought me just like them. Maybe you were nicer about it, but it's the same thing. No, he said, his voice firm. No, I didn't buy you. You handed over money, but I paid to end something. She stared at him, her gaze piercing, searching for truth. He met her eyes with a look akin to a man watching distant lightning, fearful yet resolute. I didn't know your story, he admitted, and I still don't. But I could see the ending they were scripting for you, and you think you can change that. No, he replied, his voice steady. I think you can. The barn groaned under the relentless push of the wind and thunder. Suddenly the roof moaned, and a section near the loft gave way. He looked up just as the beam fell. She shouted a desperate cry, and he pushed her aside. The beam struck his shoulder, and he fell hard into the mud. She scrambled to him, her heart pounding like a war drum. Don't move. Don't, she pleaded, her voice a mix of command and concern. I'm fine, he rasped, trying to reassure her. You're not, she insisted, kneeling beside him, cradling his head in her lap. Blood seeped through his sleeve, staining her hands. You're bleeding. It's not bad, he insisted, though his face told a different story. It is. You're crying. She noticed her own tears falling without her consent. I didn't want you to get hurt, he said, his voice breaking. I'd rather hurt than watch you get dragged back to hell. She blinked, trembling. You said I could change the ending. I believe that, he whispered, pressing his forehead to hers, a silent vow in the storm's chaos. Then stay alive, she urged, her voice a whisper of hope in the dark. With a chuckle weak yet genuine, he acknowledged the fine order of the night before. By morning, the tempest had relinquished its grip on the land, and light tiptoed back in hesitant golden slivers through the rafters. There he sat, propped against a barrel, his body swathed in bandages. She approached with coffee, offering it silently. Their fingers brushed again, a touch neither hurried to break this time. The barn lay in ruins, the house steadfastly endured, and so did they. Morning arrived with a gentleness as if the earth itself were whispering a lullaby, a soothing balm after the storm's fury. A thin veil of mist clung to the fields, a stubborn memory refusing to dissipate. Within the barn's shelter, the girls sat cross-legged beside the rancher, both enveloped in the profound silence that often follows a brush with fate. She cradled a tin mug, not for warmth, but as a steadying ritual, a comforting routine amidst chaos. His bandage soaked near the shoulder betrayed the ordeal he had endured, yet he uttered no complaint, asked for no aid. Still she brought him water, her fingers skilled from years of mending wounds, without so much as a thank you. You should rest in the house, she suggested, her voice a soft echo in the quiet barn. He shook his head, his gaze fixed on the horizon where the light of morning shyly spread. The roof needs patching, he replied, his voice as steady as the land beneath him. You almost died, she breathed out, her words hanging in the air like the morning mist. Almost isn't the same as did, he countered, his calm unnerving her. Her breath hitched, not at his words, but at the serene acceptance in his tone. Standing, she wiped her hands on her apron, then met his eyes with a gaze stripped of all pretense. I need to leave, she declared. He didn't flinch, didn't protest. You can, he said simply. I'm not saying I want you to, but I understand you need to. Why aren't you stopping me? She asked, her voice barely above a whisper. Because needing to go means you haven't chosen to stay. He answered, his words piercing her heart more deeply than she anticipated. He rose, the morning light casting his shadow long across the barn floor. As she winced in silent agony, her movements deliberate and slow, she hid her about pain as always. I'll pack the wagon, he declared with a tone that brooked no argument. She hadn't asked for his help. He wasn't offering it, he was imposing it. By the time the sun reached its zenith, her satchel was ready filled, not with treasures but with essentials, a few garments, the thread he'd silently left on her pillow after a town trip, and the apron he'd painstakingly mended after she'd torn it on a nail. He stood there beside the mule, the reins gripped tightly in his weathered hands, his figure a silent sentinel. She descended the porch steps, pausing to take the one last look at the house that now seemed to loom over her, not in physical stature, but in the weight of memories. Wait, I should be able to leave without tears, she whispered to herself, a desperate plea for emotional fortitude. You should leave however you need to, Keaton, he stated, his voice a calm harbor in her storm of emotions. She climbed into the wagon and he offered no farewells, no inquiries about future correspondence. He simply nodded, turning back towards the barn, but the mule remained rooted, an unwilling accomplice in her escape. She tugged at the reins once, twice, but the mule wouldn't budge. The rancher glanced back, his gaze piercing. He won't move, he said. Why? She asked, her voice barely a whisper. Because he was born here, he replied. Animals sense when they're carrying someone whose heart isn't in their departure. Her gaze shifted from the stubborn mule to the endless sky above, then down to her trembling hands. I'm scared. She admitted, her voice a fragile thread in the vastness. I thought leaving would set me free, but I only feel hollow. That's because freedom isn't just about leaving, he said, his words carrying the weight of truth. It's about choosing. She descended from the wagon, her steps hesitant, stopping mere feet from him. What if I stayed? She ventured a question, hanging between them like a delicate promise. He didn't stir, his expression unchanged, that same steady gaze he'd worn at the town auction in every silent moment they'd shared. Then I'd have to build a new fence line, he answered, his voice carrying a hint of humor, a rare glimpse of warmth. Why? She pressed her voice, lowering, laden with the gravity of her next words. Because it's not just my land anymore, he said, his eyes meeting hers with an intensity that spoke volumes. Her voice dropped to a whisper, a mix of fear and hope. Would I be your wife? As they stood there, the weight of their unspoken questions hung heavily between them. She took a tentative step forward, her heart pounding with a mixture of fear and hope. What if I don't know how to be one? she asked, her voice barely above a whisper. Then we figure it out together, he replied, his hand outstretched, not in ownership, but in invitation. And for the first time, she responded to such an offer, placing her trembling hand in his. Their wedding unfolded as the sun began its descent behind the distant ridge. There were no guests to witness, no preacher to officiate, just the two of them, their hands entwined in a silent vow, sealed by the gentle rush of the creek nearby. The water flowed slow and golden, as if time itself paused to listen to their quiet pledge. "You sure?" he asked, his voice a mix of hope and caution. She nodded, her eyes reflecting the flickering light of the setting sun. "I'm not clean, nor am I new. I'm not seeking perfection. I'm just learning to be good. Wouldn't you be wary of someone who claimed to already know everything?" They didn't seal their bond with a kiss. That would come in its own time. Instead, they gathered wood, lit a fire, and cooked beans, the simple act of cooking, grounding them in their new life together. She then drew out an old scarf from her satchel, a relic from her past she had never spoken of, and tossed it into the flames. As it burned, she whispered, "It was my mother's," and watched as the fabric turned to ash. Later, he led her to the porch where a chair sanded smooth by his hands that very morning awaited her. She sat and he joined her, the sky above transforming from amber to a deep bruised purple. The last rays of light spread across the field like honey dripping onto worn linen. Turning to him, her voice shook but held firm. "I think I want to belong here," she confessed. He gazed forward, his voice steady and sure. "Then you already do." She reached out, her touch on the back of his hand was not tentative, not hesitant, but filled with intention. The wind rose, carrying with it the scent of pine and the promise of a new beginning. The tears of old, which were wrung from sorrow, but from a well of newfound strength and connection. How does one measure the weight of a moment in the touch of pine ash beneath their feet, the earth itself bearing witness to their transformation? The porch, once a silent sentinel, now cradled their shared resolve. Before twilight could claim the sky, she had not merely lingered. She had decided irrevocably. And in that decision, her very essence had been reshaped. Mornings dawned with a new rhythm, not because time itself had altered its pace, but because she met each day with an unwavering gaze, her breath steady and sure. She navigated the home with the quiet authority of someone who had staked a claim, her touch bringing life to the forgotten corners. The once dust-laden table gleamed under her care, new curtains fluttered in the kitchen, and her humming, though without melody, wove a tapestry of comfort as the stew bubbled on the stove. The house, which had once merely echoed with emptiness, now responded to her presence. He in turn labored in the barn, his movements slower yet imbued with a deliberate grace. From the doorway she observed her posture reflective, not critical, committing to memory, his every gesture, how his right leg dragged slightly, how he tapped each nail with precision before driving it home, how his silence was a companion rather than a void. Together they shared the labor of their days, she at the dawn with the cows, he at dusk with the wood. Their hands met in the passing of tools, dishes, or the reins to the mule, and neither recoiled from the touch. Their conversations ebbed and flowed with ease, or sometimes they simply let the silence speak, its texture rich with unspoken understanding. One morning she discovered a wooden box, its surface sanded to silk, resting on the windowsill. Inside, nestled among velvet, were three treasures: a dried wildflower, a blue ribbon, and a note penned in his hand. "You're not what they named you. You're what you survived and what you chose." She clutched the note to her heart, allowing tears to flow. Not the tears of past sorrows, but those of resilience and newfound belonging. The week before had been a whirlwind of emotions, not from the sting of shame or the throes of pain, but from a profound sense of recognition. Later that week, a neighbor approached one of the women who had previously cast lingering glances and murmured in hushed tones. She arrived with a jar of preserves, a humble offering, and a request for the girl to assist in sewing a christening gown for her niece. The girl did not simply agree. She responded with a fervor that lifted her spirits. "I'd be honored." And with those words, the very fabric of her world began to transform subtly yet unmistakably. Days drifted by like leaves in the wind, each moment carrying its own silent promise. One evening, as the air grew crisp and the leaves started their dance of descent, he found her on the porch, her feet carelessly draped over the rail. She wore the shawl he had given her, but now with a new confident flair. Her gaze was fixed on the sky, demanding nothing from it. He joined her, his silence speaking volumes. After some time, she turned to him, her voice soft yet resolute. "I don't think I could go back." "You don't need to," he replied, understanding her deeper meaning. "I mean not just to that town. I mean to who I was," she clarified. "You buried her," he affirmed gently. She nodded, a quiet acknowledgement of her transformation. "I didn't even say goodbye." "Some goodbyes don't need saying," he murmured. They lingered there until the sun sank low, painting the world in hues of flame. That night they lay next to each other, close yet not touching, sharing the same space but in their own worlds. In the darkness she whispered, "I've never felt safe before." "Not really." His reply came softly, his eyes still closed. "That's what a home is." She smiled, turning towards him, her voice filled with newfound warmth. "I think I love this house." And it was true. The house was no longer just a structure of wood and stone, but a sanctuary where her identity had evolved, where her value had been restored piece by trembling piece. Like her, the house had once been mute, haunted by too many shadows. Now it breathed with life. 1 week later, they ventured back into town, not for necessities or to offer apologies, but for something far more profound. They went for marriage papers to sign their names not just on documents, but on the new chapters of their lives. In the gentle hush of twilight, where only the wind, the dust, and their steadfast mule bore witness, the clerk's eyebrow arched in silent curiosity. On the journey back, she leaned into his shoulder, not from necessity, but from a deep, unspoken desire for closeness. Upon their return to the house, she discarded her boots, feeling the cool, familiar floor beneath her bare feet. Her fingers grazed the door frame, the walls, the table, as if reacquainting herself with her own essence. Turning to him, standing as he always did, hat in hand, his gaze soft and low, she uttered with profound simplicity, "Welcome home." His blink was a silent acknowledgement. "It's yours too," he replied, his voice a gentle affirmation. That evening, he carefully removed the faded photograph that had long hung above the fireplace. He didn't destroy it, nor did he conceal it. He merely placed it in a drawer, closing it with a tender touch, thereby opening a new chapter on the wall. She observed her silence, speaking volumes, and later she adorned the space with a simple stitched cloth. It bore just two names side by side, and beneath them the word "enough," a declaration of sufficiency. As autumn draped the world in its golden embrace, they prepared for the coming cold. Firewood was stacked, peaches were canned. She introduced him to the flowing script of cursive while he showed her the art of mending leather. A single argument flared over the placement of winter kale, but under the night's embrace they sat by the fire, sharing the last biscuit, their bond fortified. No longer did they seek permission to exist in this space. This was the true miracle. In a world that once bartered her value, she had seized her rightful place. In a home once haunted by the ghosts of loss, he had discovered how to love without the shackles of fear. She wasn't saved. She ascended. He wasn't healed. He chose to remain open, vulnerable, yet whole. Their home now breathed with more than just life. It resonated with purpose, with love, with the quiet strength of two souls intertwined. If you were to pass by today, you'd feel it, wouldn't you? The palpable heartbeat of a home reborn, not just alive, but vibrantly alive with meaning. Just beyond the ridge where the cottonwoods bend in homage, you'd catch sight of that porch light, a beacon of warmth in the evening. Even as twilight deepens, the air would carry the gentle cadence of laughter, as natural as the breeze itself. There always two chairs would be occupied, witnesses to countless sunsets. And should the wind favor you, the floorboards might whisper their age-old tales, creaking like ancient bones, finding solace in the warmth. In these moments, a profound thought might strike you. Perhaps not all that's broken requires mending. Some things simply need to be acknowledged. Here is your acknowledgement. You two were never defined by the labels they cast upon you. Instead, you are the sum of what you've borne, the battles you've chosen not to abandon, the life you've sculpted with bare hands and wounded hearts. And if fate smiles upon you, if courage courses through your veins, you might discover your sanctuary. A home that through your presence learns to breathe anew, rejuvenated by love, by the sheer act of staying. As we draw this series to a close, we extend our heartfelt gratitude for joining us on this journey. Your companionship has meant the world to us. Please leave a comment. Let your voice be heard. Share this with those you hold dear. Like it to show your support. Or better yet, subscribe for more stories that touch the soul. Thank you from the bottom of our hearts for being part of our narrative.